So question answer on towns, traders and craftspersons. Fill in the blanks. The Rajarajeshwara temple was built in 11th century. Ajmer is associated with Sufi saint Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti. Hampi was the capital of the Vijayanagara. The Dutch established a settlement at Dash, that is Masulipattnam, today's Machilipatnam in Andhra Pradesh. True or false? We know the name of the architect of Rajarajeshwara temple from an inscription. Yes, this is true. Merchants prefer to travel individually rather than caravans, and this is wrong. They prefer to travel in caravans, so it's false. Kabul was a major center for trade in elephants, and this is false. It was major center of trade in horses. Surat was an important trading port on the Bay of Bengal. This is false. How was water supplied to the city of Tanjavur? So water supply for the city of Tanjavur came from wells and tanks. Who lived in the black towns in cities such as Madras? So merchants, artisans like weavers, native traders and craftspersons, they lived in the black towns. Why do you think towns grew around temples? There are certain factors responsible for the growth of towns around temples. First is a large number of priests, workers, artisans and traders. They settled near the temple and they catered to the various needs of people as well as the pilgrims who flocked to the temples, and by the town taken its shape or grew, which came to be known as temple towns, town known for their temples. How important were craftspersons for the building and maintenance of temples? So the craftspersons, they played a vital role, important role in the building and maintenance of temples. The Vishwakarma community, consisting of the goldsmith, the bronzesmith, the blacksmith, mason and carpenters, they were essential to the building of temples. The weavers like Saliyar and Kaikolars, they were a prosperous community and they made ample donation to the temples. And the craftspersons of Bidar, they were skilled in their inlay work in copper and silver, and they were also important for building and maintenance of temples in their own way. Why did people from distant lands visit Surat? So people from distant land, they visit Surat because of certain reasons. First, Surat was the gateway for trade with West Asia via the Gulf of Hormuz, and Surat was also known to be the gate to Mecca because many pilgrims take their ships or from here, that is many pilgrim ships set sail from here. There was a big market for cotton textiles and one could find several retail and wholesale shops selling cotton textiles. And the textiles of Surat, they were famous for their gold lace borders like the zari, and had a market in West Asia, Africa and Europe. And there were ample rest houses for the visitors. Magnificent building and innumerable pleasure parks, they attracted people of far off places. In what ways was craft production in cities like Calcutta differ from those cities like Tanjavur? So the craft production in Tanjavur was in the form of inlay work in copper and silver, while in Calcutta it was in the form of cotton textiles, the jute textiles and silk textiles. Compare any one of the cities described in this discussion with two or a village, town or a village with which you are familiar or you know about them, and did you notice any similarities or differences? So I would suggest this to be done by you because you are more aware of the town or village which is nearby you. What do temple towns present or represent? The temple town represent very important pattern of urbanization. Why did the rulers endow temples with grants of land and money? They did so in order to carry out elaborate rituals, feed the pilgrims and priests, and celebrate the festivals. How did pilgrims contribute to the temples? They made donations. Pilgrims made donations. What is bronze? Bronze is an alloy. So it's an alloy that contains copper and tin. What is a bell metal? Bell metal contains greater proportion of tin than other kinds of bronze. So this produces a bell-like sound. How did temple authorities use their wealth? So they used their wealth to finance trade and banking. What did the Indian traders bring from Africa? So they bought gold and ivory from Africa. Name a few Indian species, or this is spices basically. Species of spices which became an important part of European cooking. The answer is pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, dried ginger, right? Next is what were craft? This is another question, ninth question actually. What were craftspersons of Bidar famous for? So they were famous for their inlay work in copper and silver. CUNAG. What do the ruins of Hampi reveal? So the ruins of Hampi reveal a well fortified city. Why has Surat been called the gate of Mecca? Because Surat has been called the gate of Mecca. Why? Many pilgrims ships set sail from here, or they start their journey from here itself, the ship journey to Mecca. What were the textiles of Surat famous for? So the textiles of Surat were famous for their gold lace border, that is zari work. What was special with the Surat hundis? The Surat hundi, they were so popular and honored, they were even recognized in the far off markets like the Cairo in Egypt, Basra in Iraq, and Antwerp in Belgium. Why did the Dutch and English East India companies attempt to control Masulipatam? Since Masulipatam became the most important part of the Andhra coast. How did the European companies gain control of the sea trade? They gained control of the sea trade by using their naval power. What was the system of advances? Under this system, the weavers had to weave cloth which was already promised to European agents. They cannot weave their own or in their own way. Name the residence meant for the white rulers in Madras. Fort St. George. And name the residence meant for the white rulers in Calcutta. It's Fort St. William. Mention some articles of trade on which temple authorities collected taxes. So sugar and jaggery, dyes, thread, cotton, coconut, salt, nuts, butter, sesame oil and cloth. What is lost wax technique? In this technique, the statues are being made, or lost wax technique was used to make chola bronze statues. And this technique involved several stages. First of all, an image was made of wax, and then this was covered with clay and left in sun to dry. So it was then heated, and very small hole was made in this clay cover which engulfed the wax. Now the molten wax was drained out through this hole, and then the molten wax was poured into the clay mold through the hole. So once the metal cooled and solidified, the clay cover was carefully removed and the image was cleaned and polished. What purpose did small towns serve, and describe various junctions of small towns? So several small towns, they came to be seen in the subcontinent from the 8th century onward. So these towns usually had a mandapika, or you can say mandi, where nearby villagers come to sell their produce. And these towns also had market streets which were called hart, or you can say lined up shop. There were also streets of different kinds of artisans like the potters, oil pressers, sugar market, the toddy makers. So many traders came from far and near to these towns to buy local articles and to sell products of distant places like the salt, camphor, horse, etc. Find out about the present day taxes on markets, who collect the taxes and how are they collected and are they used for. So the present day taxes on market, they are collected as license fees of shop, and it is the duty of the MCD to collect these taxes. Basically, income tax department is there in our country, but if you are in say municipal corporation area, so MCD does this work with the help of their department. The taxes collected by the department is used for the welfare of public, roads, sewage, electricity and water. Give an account of architecture of Hampi. So the architecture of Hampi was very distinctive in very various ways. Hampi was well fortified city. No mortar or cementing agent was used in the construction of these walls. The technique followed was to wedge them together just by interlocking. The building in the royal complex had splendid arcs, domes and pillared halls with niches for holding sculptures. They also had well-planned orchards and the pleasure gardens with sculptural motifs like the lotus and corbels. How was Hampi in its heyday in the 15th-16th century? When did it fall into ruin? So in the heyday, or in its heyday, in the 15th-16th century, Hampi was an important center for commercial center as well as cultural activity center. Moors, which was a name used collectively for the Muslims merchant, chettis and the agents of European traders like the Portuguese visited the markets of Hampi. And temples were hub of cultural activities. So temple dancers known as Devadasis, they performed before the deities, royalty and masses in the many pillared halls in the Virupaksha, a form of Shiva temple. So the Mahanavami festival was one of the most important festivals celebrated at Hampi. Hampi fell into ruin following the defeat of the Vijayanagara in 1565 by the Deccani Sultans. What were the reasons of decline of Swat? The Surat, actually it's not Surat, let's change it. Okay, it's Surat, right? It's a city in Gujarat. So Surat, which was an important trade center during the Mughal period, began to decline towards the end of the 17th century, and this was because certain factors. Because of the decline of Mughal Empire, Surat faced huge loss of markets and productivity, and the control of sea routes, they went into the hand of the Portuguese, and Surat could not compete with Bombay, could not compete. Why? Because the English East India Company shifted its headquarters in 1668. What did the city of Masulipatam populous, or why did it was populous and prosperous? The city of Masulipatam, today's Machilipatnam, was center of intense activity during 17th century. Both the Dutch and English East India companies attempted to control this city as it became the most important part of the Andhra coast. And Qutub Shah, ruler of Golconda, he imposed royal monopolies on the sale of textiles, spices and other items in order to prevent the trade passing completely into the hands of various East India companies. And this led to a fierce competition among various trading groups like the Golconda nobles, Persian merchants, Telugu Komati Chettis and European traders. And because of this, they became populous and prosperous. How did the system of advances snatch the freedom of the weavers? How did the Indian craftsperson lose their independence? So the Indian textiles were in great demand in European markets. Because of this, the England began to make attempts to control the Indian craftspersons by appointing Indian traders as their agents. They introduced the system of advances under which the weavers had to weave cloth which was already promised to European agents. Weavers no longer had their liberty or selling their own cloth or weaving their own pattern. They cannot do that. But they had to reproduce the design supplied to them by the company agents. and this system snatched the freedom of Indian weavers and they began to be guided by someone else. Describe the trade activities of big and small traders belonging to the medieval time. So there were many kinds of traders. These included the Banjaras and several traders, especially the horse traders. So the traders usually traveled in caravans and they formed guilds to protect their interests. And there were several such guilds in South India from 18th century onwards. The most famous being the Mani Gramam and the Nanadesi. And these guilds traded extensively both with the peninsula and the Southeast Asia and China. So there were also communities like the Chettiars and the Marwari Oswal who went to become the major trading company of the country. Then Gujarati traders, including the communities of Hindu Baniyas and Muslim Bohras, they traded extensively with the ports of Red Sea, Persian Gulf, East Africa, Southeast Asia and China. So they sold textiles and spices in these ports, and in exchange they bought gold and ivory from Africa and spices, tin, Chinese blue pottery and silver from Southeast Asia and China. So the towns on the west coast were home to Arab and Persian, Chinese, Jewish, Syrian, Christian traders. Indian spices and cloth sold in the Red Sea ports were bought by Italian traders and eventually reached European markets, fetching very high gains and profits. And this ultimately drew European traders to India. Describe the Surat as gateway to the west. So Surat in Gujarat was the emporium of west trade during the Mughal period, along with Cambay, which is the Khambat now, and somewhat later the Ahmedabad, right? Surat was the gateway of trade with West Asia via the Gulf of Ormuz. Surat had also been called the gate of Mecca because many pilgrim ships set sail from here. Surat was a cosmopolitan city inhabited by people of all caste and creed, and in the 17th century the Portuguese, the Dutch and English had their factories and warehouses of Surat. So several retail and wholesale shops could be found in Surat. These shops sold cotton textiles. So it is worth mentioning that the textiles of Surat were famous for their gold lace borders, zari, and had a market in West Asia, Africa and Europe. So the state provided all the facilities to the people who came to the city from all over the world. The Kathiawar Seths or the others, they had huge banking houses at Surat. So the Surat Hundis were so much honored in far off market, that is exchange can be done. So even in Cairo, Basra and Antwerp, those in Egypt, Iraq, Belgium, they were honored.